Welcome to the Ideal Investor Show. Join us on the journey to financial success. Let's go. And welcome to another episode of the Ideal Investor Show, where we bring you great shows and great interviews. And every so often, I am actually on here with you directly to talk about topics that are relevant for investors. And today's topic is the FIRE movement and real estate, and the question if this is a match made in heaven. So for those of you who haven't heard about the FIRE movement, it is basically an abbreviation that stands for investing to retire early. And the idea, as far as the concept goes, is that as soon as you can and as early as possible in your life, when you still have a lot of freedom when it comes to your money, to be living a very frugal life. So what does that mean? If you think about the time that you were going to high school and then maybe going to college, or when you had your first job, most people during those years, which is basically between 20 and early 30s, those 10, 12, 15 years, most of the time we don't yet have a family, at least recent generations haven't started families typically until their late 20s or early 30s. And therefore, if you got a good education and you got a good job or reasonably good job, your expenses should be comparatively low to later in life. So if they are comparatively low, what some people do is just basically using the extra money to splurge, to consume, to buy stuff where you really have to later ask yourself, did I really need this? Now, if you follow the FIRE movement, it's almost the opposite. You find a reasonable place to live, but within means. If you are a single person or you have a single partner and no family yet, then you may be happy with a studio or maybe a one-bedroom apartment, right? So that's obviously not as expensive as a house. Same thing if you decide to lease a car, like take one of the really cheap lease offers that come around every so often, where you can maybe for $100 or so lease a car, or buy a used car where you basically only have to pay insurance and gas, and that's pretty much it. So you keep the cost for transportation low, you keep the cost for housing low, and you also look at what am I actually spending on food and entertainment and those kind of things. You decide which streaming channel do you want. Do you want Amazon Prime, or do you want Paramount, or do you want Apple, or whichever one you want, and then you stick with that one and not necessarily any other one, so that you can keep the cost down. So if you actually decide to go with this relatively frugal approach, then you should have a good portion of the money that comes in every month available to invest. Now, the FIRE movement actually suggests that you do these investments in index funds. And index funds, just for a simple explanation, is if you look at the stock market, you know that there are a couple really large groupings, basically. One of the most famous is the Dow Jones Index, which is 30 companies together. Then you have the S&P 500, which is 500 companies, the top 500 companies in each business and economic category together. Or you have heard about the NASDAQ. And sometimes there are also groupings underneath. Like I think the NASDAQ has like 8,000 companies, but there is like an index called the NASDAQ 100, which is the 100 biggest companies within the NASDAQ. Or there is a Russell index, which has 2,000 companies. So those are indices or indexes. And companies like Vanguard and Fidelity and other companies like it, they basically create opportunities where you can spend, let's say, $1,000 a month, and you're buying basically that index. And the idea of the FIRE movement then is that over time, you're going to build a portfolio that gets to a value that if you actually, let's say I need to get $5,000 per month, that means you need to get $60,000 out of your portfolio. If you had $1 million worth of index fund money, and it increases by 6%, that would be those $60,000. And you could spend those $60,000 and still would have your $1 million in value preserved. So the goal is to get to that 1 million, or if your number is higher than $5,000 a month, then to maybe 2 million or whatever the number is in value, and you get there as quickly as possible. Now, why was the title Is Real Estate and the FIRE Movement a Match Made in Heaven? One of the things that is oftentimes not mentioned as part of the FIRE movement is that you can long-term spend 4% typically plus inflation from your existing portfolio, and it's not gonna basically get lower in value because the average increase in the indexes in the stock market is somewhere in the area of 5 to 7%. The issue obviously comes up when you have like anything more than 1 or 2% inflation. When the FIRE movement was first invented, inflation was typically 1 to 2%. So that meant if you take 4% plus 1 to 2%, meaning like 6 or 7% out of your portfolio, and the market is growing by 6 or 7%, you could do this forever as soon as you reach $1 million, and you would never get below that $1 million. Now, you all know that in the last few years, we had years where the inflation was much, much more than 1 to 2%, especially when you look at the real inflation, because certain things you don't buy all the time, but food and those kind of things and gas and energy you need all the time. And that's the stuff that has increased much more. We had in certain years 6%, 8%, 9% inflation. So if you take that plus the 4%, then you're actually starting to reduce the value of your portfolio. And that's the difference to real estate, because in an index portfolio, you basically only have stocks, and you're dependent on those stocks to increase in value. And historically, they have, so it's nothing wrong with the general idea. But when you compare it to real estate, you have multiple forms of income from real estate. Number one is you have the same or similar increase. Now, you can argue that stocks increase in value more than real estate, and you would be right in most cases. But real estate has an increase in value steadily over long periods of time of 3 to 4%. So about half of what the stock market does. But here comes the other part. When you buy real estate, especially as an investor, then you have the income of the appreciation, the increase in value. Then you have the income from rent. And you have the income that is basically the tax saving because of the depreciation, the tax write-off that you have from your real estate. And keep in mind, in those first 20, 25 years while you're working and you're having this good income, you have to pay income taxes on this money, right? So if you had depreciation from your real estate, you can actually save part of that income tax. So there's a great guy that I followed for many, many years by the name of Keith Weinhold, who has pointed these things out many, many times. And there are a few other things that also could be considered income that I don't even want to mention. Keith always speaks of 5 different income sources, basically, from investing real estate. So what does this mean? That means in residential real estate, as an investor, it is not very hard to make 15% or more in return. And that is consistently for decade after decade after decade. So the idea of somebody being frugal, putting money into real estate, maybe 50-50 with the stock market, and having all these benefits accumulating, will lead to the fact that ultimately your real estate will be paid off. You will have these $5,000 of income. You will maintain the real estate, and it keeps growing in value. So if you compare the two, just to finish up on this, let's say you had $1 million in real estate and $1 million in the stock market. When you start using these 4, 5, 6% of the $1 million to pay yourself and not having to go to work anymore, you're always running the risk that that $1 million is still going to be there, and you will, by the FIRE movement philosophy, have to be happy if you're maintaining your $1 million. Now, in real estate, you have your $1 million portfolio, you're getting your $5,000 a month, But as the inflation keeps going, your portfolio of real estate keeps increasing in value, and your mortgages keep being paid off, and your write-offs in the tax code will remain and allow you, if you have any other income, to deduct from it the depreciation. So those are the benefits if you compare the two, that you will never ever consume your real estate. But there is a risk that you consume your index fund money if the market is not doing well. So that's why fire movement in real estate is a match made in heaven. And I hope that helps you to see that yes, the fire movement is great, but you also want to think about, should it all be 100% in stocks, or should you maybe do 50-50 with real estate? And ultimately, I can tell you, if you do that, you will find that real estate is just a better deal long term. So that's it for today. Be well and stay safe, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.